In Defense of the Grid, written by Jack Meyer. Copyright 2023. Narrated by Daniel Daly. Audiobook copyright 2025. Prologue. There was a buzz throughout the White House Situation Room, and people were coming and going frantically, but with purpose. Multiple monitors on one wall were tuned to every network station and all the major cable news channels, though all were muted and normal programming was apparent. An electronic map on another wall had zoomed into the Asian continent. Men and women in military uniforms were present, along with many in civilian garb. President Jennifer Warner sat at the head of a conference table. The 50-something leader of the free world brushed aside her shoulder-length brown hair and adjusted the earpiece that she wore in her left ear. The stern look on her lined face showed resolve, and her brown eyes were riveted on the image of General Frank Rodriguez, the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, in another large video monitor. "Madam President," he said, "we are ready to review relevant nuclear launch plans on your order. 3 Columbian-class nuclear missile subs are within striking distance. U.S.-based nuclear missiles are available to launch on your command. EMP option is available for each." There were multiple nuclear launch plans related to China available. Each had been carefully thought through for addressing different scenarios, and were always accessible to the President. When traveling, they were in a large briefcase, officially called the Presidential Emergency Satchel, and nicknamed the Nuclear Football. The plans were also available in the Situation Room. A military aide stood by the President with the plasticized cards which accompanied each plan. Once a plan was agreed upon, the President would be handed the card for that plan, and an exchange of codes between the military and her would initiate the steps to launch nuclear weapons. A challenge code for that plan would be spoken to the President, and she would verbally return a response code. Once confirmed, they would send the encrypted authorization to the Pentagon, and would initiate the next step in the process to ensure the correct plan was implemented and confirmed by those in place to launch the missiles. "Let's talk through your top 3 recommendations," the President said. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff spent 2 minutes talking each plan, all of which the President was thoroughly familiar with. "Your recommendation?" Werner barked. "Delta Echo will take out their satellites, hobbling their command and control, and utilize EMPs to limit bloodshed in the attack," he said. "It is a measured attack." "What is the likelihood that we can down all inbound missiles?" 83%, ma'am." "Carl?" "Ma'am, please allow me to remind you that a first strike is necessary if we hope to save tens of millions of American lives by reducing the risk of a nuclear EMP or a nuclear blast on U.S. soil." Carl Watkins, the National Security Advisor, counseled. Watkins, who was a former Navy admiral, stood just 20 feet away. His 6'2" frame was erect and his jaw rigid. The President closed her eyes momentarily and took a deep breath. Chapter 1. 111 days earlier. Tony Nestler shook his head and ran his fingers through his curly blonde hair as the meeting ended. His lips were pursed, and the sharp gaze from his boyish face left no doubt about his disappointment with the strategy discussion. He closed his notebook and shoved it in his briefcase. Nestler, the 46-year-old Secretary of the Department of Energy, hurriedly moved around the mahogany conference table in the paneled West Wing conference room, pushing high-backed leather chairs aside as he passed. He waved at the Vice President to get his attention. Vice President Dexter took a deep breath and turned to face Nestler. Tony twisted his 6-foot frame around as he looked in both directions to ensure none of the other meeting attendees remained close enough to hear. "John, we can't continue kicking the can down the road on this," he whispered with conviction. "You know how vulnerable our electric grid is. We don't even have a plan to study those vulnerabilities, let alone defend them." John Dexter had been a friend of Tony's for years. They had started their careers in the same law firm. They worked 90-hour weeks and billed so many hours that they knew they were on a fast track to be partners in the firm. Dexter was a fitness junkie who lifted weights regularly and tried to run 20 miles per week. He was good at his job, but hated being pinned down to a desk all day, every day. Ultimately, he developed an interest in politics. He had been a great candidate with dashing good looks, short black hair that he had gotten from his Italian mother, and a muscular physique. His charisma drew people to him. He ran a successful campaign to become the U.S. Congressman from the 6th District in Colorado, and had been in politics ever since. Nestler was indeed offered a partner position in the firm, but declined and instead went to work for an energy company in Denver. The two men remained good friends, and their families became close as well. When John was picked to be presidential candidate Jennifer Warner's running mate, he introduced her to Tony, who became an advisor for the campaign regarding all things energy. When the Warner-Dexter ticket won the White House, Tony was nominated to be Energy Secretary. Dexter knew Tony was right regarding the vulnerability of the electric grid, but it was the president who set the agenda. Tony, the electric industry is working to develop safeguards for our electric grid. At present, the government has no real role in that. In addition to that, we have no budget to even do a study. Mr. Vice President, Tony said, now in a normal voice and using his friend's title for effect. If we get hit by a solar flare or an EMP, experts have projected that most Americans will die within a year. How can we continue ignoring the risk? And you know the president has enough discretionary money to fund such a study. The president feels that our best defense is through diplomacy. We just have to make sure it never happens. Oh, come on. Who is she going to send to negotiate with the sun? Need I remind you that a solar flare melted our telegraph system in 1859? That was a telegraph system. It got repaired. Exactly. Now we live in a society where everything is dependent on the electric grid. A solar flare or an EMP attack would send so much current through that grid that everything connected to it would be rendered useless. Every electric panel in every home and office building and hospital would be destroyed. All those fancy electronic appliances would be fried. Every emergency generator, car, or whatever built after 1985 would become a sheet metal and wire statue that does nothing but rust over time. Okay, Tony, I know you're right. I'll arrange a time for you and me to meet with the president to talk only about this. Nestler exhaled in relief. Thanks. I know this isn't just the fault of this administration, but we could get the ball rolling on it. Someday President Werner could be praised as a visionary who defended our nation, even the world, to no lesser degree than the U.S. Armed Forces did in World War II. I know. I just hope it's long after we're dead and gone, Dexter said, smiling. See you, the vice president said as he turned and walked back into his office. Chapter 2. Tony's day went longer than he had planned. The drive home seemed longer, too. The springtime weather was pleasant. The trees were beginning to bud. The direct sunlight shining into the car was quite warm. He even put his air conditioner on for the first time this year. He hated the commute to Manassas, Virginia, but they had decided to buy well outside the Beltway in order to have some semblance of a normal life. They weren't the party type, and this gave them an excuse to say no to many of the invitations they received. It helped that homes there were so much less than the one they had sold in Denver. It had made up for the cut in pay he had suffered when he accepted the nomination to be in the president's cabinet. He looked at his watch as he pulled into the driveway. He groaned to himself because he had promised Megan and Josh that he would be home by 6 p.m. It was 6:45, and he was disappointed in himself for not keeping that promise. This was the last night before Josh returned to Texas Tech to finish his junior year. It had been great to have him home for spring break, but Tony's job had made it difficult to see as much of his son as he would have liked. As he opened the door from the garage, he stepped into the large, brightly lit kitchen, put on the most dejected look he could muster, and said, "I'm sorry, sweetie. It was just one of those days." Megan, his wife of 23 years, turned from the stovetop and looked at him. She strode slowly around the marble-covered island, stroking her long brown ponytail in front of her as she did. She had the face of a model with perfectly smooth skin, blue eyes that sparkled, and that cute button nose. She put on that smile that melted him every time, reached her arms up to rest on his shoulders, stood on her tiptoes, and gave him a peck on the lips. "I understand, dear. At least I won the bet," she said somewhat gleefully. "The bet?" "Sure. Josh said you wouldn't be home until 7, and I said you would beat that." Tony groaned. "I'm that predictable, huh?" "But don't beat yourself up over it. We know you have a lot on your plate. This was also your night to cook," she reminded. "It's okay. We still love you." "Don't be so quick with that, Mom," Josh said as he walked into the kitchen. "You made me lose a bet, Dad," he said with an air of disgust as he hugged his father. Josh had apparently gotten his height gene from his mother. He stood 5'10", with a ruddy complexion and sported a buzz cut. He had a thin frame but a well-structured physique as he worked out 5 times a week. Tony hugged him back and then backed away. "Thanks for being so gracious," he barked, putting his fist in John's gut at the word gracious, mimicking a real punch. John laughed. "I'll give you that one. Just remember that I can kick your butt if I really want to." With that, Tony rolled his eyes. "Dinner at 7, so wash up, get what you want to drink, and get to the table," Megan announced. Chapter 3. They sat down at the table, and Tony led the prayer. "So, it was a tough day, huh?" Megan observed, as she passed the platter of pot roast with potatoes and carrots to Josh. "Well, I wouldn't say it was a tough day, just frustrating." "Political issues?" Josh asked. "Well, that's the case every day." "No, I just can't seem to convince people of the risk that an EMP attack or solar flares would be to our electric grid," Tony explained. "This is something that grates on your dad constantly," Megan explained to Josh. "EMP?" Josh recited. "I know I've heard the term, but I don't remember what it's about." An EMP is an electromagnetic pulse that would be generated by a nuclear blast high in the atmosphere. It would hit our power lines and everything else that has wires, but is relatively exposed, and generate such a surge that everything tied to the system would become unusable. How would something like that happen? If we launch a nuke and it blew up en route? Well, not exactly. It would be something that an enemy might do intentionally to destroy our infrastructure. Really? Who would do something like that? Well, China, North Korea, and Russia have that capability. Iran will likely have it in the not-too-distant future. No way! They could actually shut down our electricity? For how long? If well planned, it could take 10 years or longer to restore it, Tony said. And that is no exaggeration. That's even hard to imagine, Megan commented. No lights, no heat, no air for 10 years? And that's only part of it, Tony said, as Megan and Josh stopped their forks in mid-air to hear what was coming next. Electricity is integral to everything we do. Destroying the grid means no cell phones, or landlines for that matter. Most equipment used for farming would not work, so planting and harvesting couldn't be done on a large scale. Most trucks wouldn't operate, so goods couldn't be distributed throughout the country. Industrial plants wouldn't operate. Some have suggested that if our national power grid were taken down, 90% of our population would die in the first year. Josh's eyes widened. 90%? That can't be right. People could plant gardens, go hunting, and just eat less. Well, you might think that, yet starvation could take many lives. The most vulnerable and frail among us would go quickly, as hospitals would have no power. Medications would be used up quickly, and then would no longer be available due to transportation limitations. An infection from a cut could go untreated and cause death. Most people do not realize how completely dependent we are on electric power. I hope the 90% number is an exaggeration. That's for sure, Megan said, as she put her fork down and looked to see Josh's expression. I would think that is an exaggerated number. The other thing that must be factored in is the reaction of people when put in that situation. There would be no TV or radio. The federal government would seemingly cease to exist from a local perspective. Police officers and firefighters could well choose to stay home to work with their families to survive. The banking system would be gone because most banking is done electronically. There isn't enough cash in banks to cover people's deposits. Barter would likely replace cash anyway. Tony looked at his small family and paused. Just imagine what people might do if they think their family is facing starvation. Most, out of fear, would demand those who were more prepared share what they have, or take what they think they need by violent means. Would localities decide to allow older people to die for the benefit of the young? The whole situation is unfathomable. Josh was speechless. He simply stared. I think that's enough about that, Megan cut in, noticing Tony hadn't had time to eat much of anything. We're supposed to be enjoying our last night together before Josh heads back to school. Eat your dinner, Tony. Trying to change the subject, she looked at her son. Is it going to be a tough 6 weeks, Josh? Wait a minute, Mom. Dad, you're trying to convince people of this risk and nobody will listen? How can that be? Well, on the one hand, we tend to think that even our enemies wouldn't do this because if the United States were crippled, there would be devastating impact on the entire world, even on our enemies. We want to think we can avoid it through diplomacy. Well, that's good to know, Josh said. However, Tony cautioned, a force of nature, called a solar flare from the sun, could actually have the same effect on our electric grid. I'm just trying to spur the president to initiate a study to determine how best to prepare for such an event, no matter how unlikely. She doesn't want to do anything? Well, not up until now. Today, John Dexter told me he would arrange a meeting with the president to discuss the topic. I hope he's able to do it. I don't know what it will take to convince her. I would hate for something like this to occur, even in a part of the country with no foresight or preparation. Tony polished off his glass of wine. Enough about this. Your school. Tell me what's coming. Well, I've just got a month of classes before finals. I don't think it'll be too bad. I'm looking forward to my military camp this summer. I'm so proud of your accomplishments in ROTC. Being selected for the Cadet Troop Leader Camp is a big deal. You'll gain so much from that. When do you find out where they're sending you this summer? Could be as early as next week. I can't wait. I hope it's overseas, he said enthusiastically. Josh, do you ever have regrets about joining ROTC? His mom asked. There is so much opportunity in the private sector and computer technology. Never, he said unwaveringly. Our military needs people with computer skills, too. I want to serve my country, at least for a few years. Dad's doing his service now. I want to do mine in the military. Well, I think that's great, Tony said as he put his napkin on his plate. Let's clean up these dishes and play a game of Phase 10 before it gets too late. I intend to beat you both before the night's out. Chapter 4. The calendar turned to May, and finally Tony and the vice president were able to get on President Werner's schedule to discuss the vulnerability of the electric grid. Meeting with the president was not a new thing for Tony. He attended cabinet meetings and occasionally those where he was one of several attendees. This afternoon it would be Vice President Dexter, President Werner, and her chief of staff, and him. He had 20 minutes to lead the discussion on this single topic. He also was not new to trying to sell his point of view. Much of his cabinet had been spent briefing people and even selling them on some aspect of energy creation. He had become an expert in the field. He wasn't, however, used to covering such a significant topic in 20 minutes. There would be no extension. The President of the United States' time was valuable and was in much demand. He started formulating his thoughts on how to approach the meeting soon after Dexter's promise to set something up. He had brought the subject up once before in a cabinet meeting, only to be told, "Thanks, Tony. I assure you we are not going to let that happen." He had decided to begin with the solar flare scenario and spend a couple of minutes briefing the president on the Carrington event of 1859. Carrington and another amateur astronomer in England were the first in history to observe a solar flare of the sun and document its effects on the Earth. It had taken out the telegraph system inside the United States and Europe, causing serious shocks to some telegraph operators and arcing electric current that was so hot it lit nearby papers on fire. If he could convince her that a force of nature that had actually occurred in the past could have such an impact, she might consider putting some resources towards studying the current risk. He would have to be careful how to describe the possible fallout from such an event. If she sensed he was throwing exaggerated scenarios out there, she would likely cut him off immediately. He had to stick to facts and let her draw her own conclusions. Tony and John Dexter stood outside the Oval Office at 1:55 p.m. Cindy Hawkins, the director of Oval Office operations, welcomed them and advised that the president would be available in just a minute. She typed something into her computer and then stood. Dexter offered, "I'm confident you've thought through your briefing carefully, Tony. Stick to the facts and be specific about what you want her to do. I've seen her stop meetings cold when she thought her time was being wasted." "I understand. I've written and rewritten this numerous times and have been over it with experts. I'll keep to the facts. Did you prep her in any way?" "Nope. I just told her that you had some very legitimate concerns and assured her that it would be worth her while to listen." The door to the Oval Office opened, and Chief of Staff Frank Lawton escorted Larissa Terrell, the Treasury Secretary, out of the office. Lawton, formerly a Texas congressman, had been coaxed by Wagner to join her administration immediately following her election. At 58, he'd thought that it would be a good post to retire from. He was an affable guy with wavy gray hair. He was an intimidating figure, just under 6 feet tall, carrying 240 pounds. He could change his temperament in a heartbeat, if necessary, in support of his boss. Once Lawton was clear of the door, Cindy Hawkins slipped into the Oval Office behind him. Lawton greeted both men warmly and, after pleasantries, invited them in. President Werner sat in one of 2 cream-colored chairs, aside 2 identically upholstered couches that faced one another. The carpet was beige. It had been deep blue prior to her taking office, but she felt that was too ostentatious. She preferred the lighter carpet with a burgundy border and a 4-foot round presidential seal, also somewhat understated. A silver serving set was in the middle of the ornate coffee table with a clean cup and saucer in front of each couch, probably placed where the president would like the 2 visitors to sit. President Werner stood and shook both men's hands. "John, Tony, thank you for taking the time to meet with me today. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Tony. Please help yourself to a cup of coffee. Unfortunately, I only have a few minutes, so why don't you begin?" "Thank you, ma'am." With that, the Secretary of Energy began his prepared briefing with the target of finishing in the 12 minutes that he had allowed himself. Having participated in enough cabinet meetings and briefing her during the campaign, he anticipated that she would interrupt frequently with very direct questions. He had organized his briefing in a way that would anticipate her questions and deal with them in the presentation itself. She interrupted 3 times with questions that he was able to address quickly. When he was finished, the president said nothing. Initially, she stared at the presidential seal in the carpet opposite the coffee table from her. Then she lifted her eyes and looked at Vice President Dexter. "What do you think, John?" "While the risk is low, I think the impact would be significant enough that we should at least do a study to have experts assess the possible impact, identify key vulnerabilities, and recommend how we might mitigate or prepare for such damage to our infrastructure. We should do a thorough study so that whatever we decide to do is based on the best information possible." She shook her head and looked at her chief of staff. "Frank?" "Well, this could turn into a money pit very easily. Not a lot of people really understand these things. It would probably give the opposition an opening to accuse you of wasting taxpayer money on preparation for outlandish scenarios." Finally, she looked at Tony. "How long would such a study take?" "Well, if it doesn't get bogged down in congressional hearings, an elite team could provide a thorough report on potential impact of either scenario, a solar flare or an EMP, within a year. Recommending action to prepare for such an event would likely take double that." "Okay, thank you. I agree. This is too potentially devastating to whisk away with convenient assumptions. I would like you to provide me, by the end of the month, with a list of who you think should be on such a task force. I'm talking about the expertise required and individuals who would meet those requirements and might be able and willing to serve." "Yes, ma'am." She turned to Dexter. "John, I want you to put some feelers out there with congressional leadership to see what stumbling blocks we might face in terms of cooperation. Also, Frank, I want a briefing from CIA, Defense, Homeland Security, and Joint Chiefs, and anyone else you or Tony might recommend in June. I want to know what our adversaries' capabilities are in this regard, their intent as best we know it, and how to defend against it." Lawton scribbled furiously as she spoke. "Will do," he said. She stood and started to thank them, but paused. "Tony, what about solar panels, wind-generated electricity, and other newer technologies?" "Well, good question, ma'am. Solar panels would likely receive some damage, but could be readily repaired if we had the parts. Wind turbines, being built out of steel, would also have some level of defense against such surges. Those energy sources still only generate a fraction of our energy needs, but it doesn't matter how much power we can generate if that power can't be delivered. Power substations would be irreparably damaged, and it takes 2 years to build a new one under normal circumstances. Our current electric grid uses those substations to distribute power from whatever the source to the consumer." The president took in a deep breath and exhaled loudly. "Thank you, gentlemen. John, let's put this on the agenda for our lunch on Friday. I'm inclined to put this in your portfolio. It will likely take a ramrod to do this without getting bogged down." "Sounds good," Dexter agreed. "Thank you for allowing me the time to brief you on this," Tony said in a sharp, professional tone. "I appreciate your tenacity, Tony. I'm sorry it took so long to get my attention." As they left, Dexter invited Tony to his West Wing office for a wrap-up meeting. The vice president closed the office door and took a bottle of Michener's 10-year-old bourbon from his wet bar. He clinked some cubes of ice into 2 glasses and poured them each a double shot. Handing Tony a glass, he said, "How do you think that went?" Tony tipped his head back slightly and bulged his eyes. "I can't imagine it going better than that. In my time with Werner, I've never seen anything like it. Yet flat out got her attention. Thanks for your help with it, John. I really do appreciate your support. Is there anything you suggest as to how to best follow through?" "Well, when it comes to giving her names on this, be sure you pick people who are apolitical, or at least who don't have political animosity toward one side or the other. And be sure they would serve willingly. We don't want anyone with an agenda. How do I do that in such a short time? I'll call Dan Brewer at the FBI and ask him to do quick and dirty reviews of people who impress you. If you give him a week, he'll get them done. Tony put his glass down on the bar top and reached out his hand. Thanks again for your support. This is a good thing. Indeed, it is. Chapter 5. It was nearly mid-June, and President Werner had received Frank Lawton's feedback on the list that her Energy Secretary had provided as recommendations for the power grid study. Lawton had been favorably disposed toward everyone on the list, but felt that a few names should be added to create a perception of political balance. The President had asked that everyone on the revised list be approached personally by her staff to confirm their willingness to serve and to set up a briefing in July. The defense briefing that she had requested was about to begin. She had invited Tony Nestler as a courtesy since he had elevated the concern. Nestler felt a bit out of his element. While he held the appropriate security clearance for the discussion, he rarely was involved in such discussions outside of cabinet meetings, where talks were held from a 3,000-foot perspective, mostly strategic with little detail. Frank Lawton raised his voice and thanked everyone for preparing this briefing for the President. With the room quiet, the President chimed in. Yes, thank you all for your time this afternoon. We will follow the agenda that you were sent last week. Mr. Carlin, please begin. Lawrence Carlin, the CIA director, stood and immediately began. Carlin had been one of her chief rivals in the race for their party's nomination for president. He had been a U.S. Senator from Ohio before taking on the role of Secretary of State for the last administration. He referenced slides that had been prepared for his presentation, and his deep, strong voice captured their attention. Madam President, since we first tested an EMP in 1962, the United States and the Soviet Union have been quite familiar with the potency of such a weapon. Over the last 50 years, many of the details relating to that experiment have become public knowledge, so almost all nuclear states have developed delivery systems capable of delivering a nuclear device to be detonated at altitude. With the previous administration's posture in allowing balloons from adversaries to float over our continent at will, I would think anyone would have the capability to deliver one, the President chided. Carlin rolled his eyes. Please explain the 1962 test and its results, the President interjected. Yes, ma'am. The United States Atomic Energy Commission, with assistance from the Pentagon, designed a test in which a small 1.4 megaton warhead was detonated 240 miles above the Pacific Ocean, near Johnston Island. The first two attempts failed due to delivery system problems. The third attempt was successful. The resulting damage was far beyond the expectation of the experts at the time. All electrical systems on Johnston Island were destroyed, and significant damage was done to both civilian and military electrical infrastructure on the Hawaiian Islands, nearly 800 miles away. In addition, several satellites were either damaged or destroyed by passing through the resultant radiation field left by the blast. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Our sources inside China indicate that they do have plans on the books for use of nuclear weapons for EMP creation over the United States. Some plans are for regional effects, and others are designed to impact the entire continental United States. Is that done through differently sized warheads? The President asked. Well, yes and no. The impact area can be determined by the height of the blast above ground. Destruction of unprotected equipment and the power grid itself will be primarily to areas within the line of sight of the blast. The blast at 150 miles above the central United States would directly impact a large part of the continental U.S. However, the higher altitude the blast, the less direct impact to the power grid and electronic devices by the same-sized device. Of course, the altitude element can be diminished by using a larger blast. The lower the altitude, the higher the impact, even with a smaller blast. It is all a matter of physics. If someone wanted to take out major cities in California, it would be done by generating a blast 50 miles into the Pacific at a relatively low altitude with a 3 or 4 megaton blast. "And Russia?" the president asked. Well, before I move on, I should mention that China's plans call for starting such an attack with a cyber attack designed to take down the grid in the northeastern United States. The resulting communication disruption and inconvenience would be a distraction before the rest of the plan is implemented. Russia's primary nuclear attack plan against the United States involves conventional nuclear warfare, with ground blasts in areas of important governmental and military presence. They do have a plan for use of an atmospheric blast over the northeastern quadrant of the United States. However, they generally prefer the approach of destroying people and assets. North Korea, while they do have a rudimentary nuclear capability, they currently don't have the ability to accurately deliver such a weapon. Their current capability is to build something in the 1 kiloton range, which certainly must be respected, but would not be a threat to the entire country. What is your assessment of the likelihood that China or Russia would attempt such an attack? Our assessment is that the threat is extremely low. Both know that such an attack would be the beginning of a global thermonuclear war, and have the understanding that nobody would win such a war. Thank you, Larry. Jim? Jim Jeffrey, the Secretary of Defense, stood. Jeffrey towered over the room at 6 foot 5 inches tall. He had been an executive for a defense contractor for many years. He was not a diplomat, but his leadership style fit the military connection quite well. At 49, he was one of the youngest people in the cabinet. "Yes, ma'am," he said with a southern drawl. "The threats that Mr. Carlin has outlined are well understood by the Defense Department. Strategically, the best defense to such an attack is our missile defense system. You are aware of the strategic locations and capabilities of that. As you know, the system is not perfect, but is very effective. Early warning is everything. As Lawrence said, a blast over international waters would have a serious impact on our nation. This means that we would need to recognize an incoming intercontinental ballistic missile, or balloon as it were, lock onto it and fire on it before it gets to a location where it could impact us. The greatest threat would be for hundreds of missiles being launched over a similar attack. It is likely that something would get through. If an incoming missile is destroyed, the warhead would likely not detonate. Is that correct? Well, in the past, nuclear warheads were designed that way, to arm themselves just prior to arrival at their target. However, they can be easily redesigned to have an impact from an outside source trigger the warhead. Since they would be going for an EMP value anyway, such a trigger should be expected. I've asked General Rodriguez to address military readiness. General Rodriguez, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, rose. Good morning, President Werner. Should such an attack occur, it would be the start of a nuclear World War III. We have plans for an immediate counterattack from our Columbia-class submarines carrying nuclear missiles. Any of those is capable of being programmed for an atmospheric blast or a blast on impact. Each of our foreign bases have a rapid response plan that is practiced routinely should such an attack take place. At our strategic points within the United States, we do have equipment and workspaces currently set up in Faraday cages, the steel enclosures that an EMP would not penetrate. In each of those locations, we have protected, rapidly deployed satellite communication systems that would allow us wartime command and control capability. If our satellites were destroyed as part of that initial attack, we have contingency plans in which the command would move to the Pacific region or other less impacted command headquarters. I know that you are very familiar with war-related plans, so I won't take the time to get into more details unless you would like me to. No, thank you, General Rodriguez. Larry, are we aware of any space-based nuclear warheads in our enemy's arsenal?
No. Neither China or Russia currently has nukes in space, the CIA chief said directly.
We're sure, the president said, as much a question as a statement.
Yes, we're sure. Their primary effort in space has to do with laser technology, as is ours.
Thank you, gentlemen. Wanda? Wanda Peterman, the Secretary of Homeland Security, rose. Peterman had risen through the ranks at the FBI and become the first African-American female to earn that post. She was a no-nonsense leader. The fact that she was quite attractive had caused some to underestimate her along the way. However, her competence and toughness quickly cleared up any misunderstanding in that regard. Good afternoon, ma'am. The destruction of our power grid would certainly be a catastrophic event. Any vehicle, appliance, communication device that has computer chips or circuit boards in it would be rendered useless. This includes automobiles built after 1985. All modern train engines, over-the-road trucks, and advanced farm equipment. We would initially have no way to pump gasoline or diesel fuel from ground tanks, and our oil refineries would be down for months. Obviously, people would have no power to their homes. This would impact accessibility to clean water, food storage capabilities, cooking appliances, and the like. Our capability to mass-produce anything would be gone because of our reliance on computer circuitry and electricity in the manufacturing process. Our farm productivity would generally be reduced to whatever crops could be planted, cared for, and harvested with human labor. Some aircraft would be operational, though replacement parts may be needed. Our air traffic control system would revert to something akin to the 1930s, when pilots used visual sightings to keep separated from other aircraft. With transportation systems extremely limited, at least for a few months, feeding people would be the greatest challenge. Even if food could be distributed via aircraft, distribution beyond airports would be almost impossible. Police and fire personnel would not have the transportation capabilities to do their work effectively. In its current state, the Federal Emergency Management Agency would be of little help to anyone. Our citizens would have a roof over their heads, but little else. With no communications, panic would likely ensue, and violence would follow. Wanda, do we have any plans or systems in place to prepare for such a catastrophe? No, ma'am, we do not. The president frowned. The only positive news I've heard so far is that our enemies recognize the risks to themselves were they to attempt such an attack. I hope our risk of damage from the sun is as predictable. Chapter 6. Dr. Brandel, please give us some good news, the president said resignedly. Lynn Brandel, the director of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, stood. Brandel had a Ph.D. in atmospheric science and nearly 20 years in the field. Good afternoon, ma'am. The NOAA does have a space weather prediction center that works closely with NASA, monitoring all we can relating to the sun. Solar storms are a natural phenomenon, though most are small and do not have the devastating effect that we are discussing today. However, if one of these solar storms is large enough and directed toward the Earth, it could produce geomagnetically induced currents. We refer to those as GICs. These currents engaging the Earth produced the same pulse as the third wave of an EMP, potentially causing permanent damage to critical components of our electric grid, such as high-voltage transformers. "Wait a minute," the President said with her hand raised in a halting position. "A third wave?" Brandel looked toward the room to see if another attendee wanted to address the question. Jim Jeffrey from Defense leaned forward. "Yes, ma'am. When an EMP is generated, the energy is dispersed through 3 waves. The first pulse is referred to as E1. It is the instantaneous and brief electromagnetic field that introduces extremely high voltages into conductors of electricity. This impulse damages computers, communication devices, and the like. The damage is done by exceeding the power limitations of anything with computer chips or boards. It strikes so quickly that most surge protectors and similar safeguards cannot trip quickly enough to save the equipment. The electric industry has tested some large surge protectors that may be able to protect some equipment from an E1 wave, but this R&D is in the early stages of development. The second wave is referred to as E2. This wave lasts slightly longer, I'm told, a microsecond to 1 second after the blast. This wave has similar properties to electromagnetic waves produced by a lightning strike, except across the entire affected area. A lightning strike is actually more powerful than an E2 wave, but is very localized. By itself, this wave would not be too damaging because lightning protection that is built into most systems would handle this without a problem. However, because it strikes a fraction of a second after the E1 pulse, those protection systems would mostly be destroyed so the E2 pulse could do further damage. The E3 pulse is very different. It is much slower, lasts tens to even hundreds of seconds. It does damage by pushing the Earth's natural magnetic field out of the way, followed by that field restoring itself to its natural place. It will induce currents into long conductors such as power lines and will damage or destroy transformers. It actually introduces a different type of current into the power grid that it is designed for. The E3 pulse is the one that would take out the broad electric grid. "Thank you, Jim," the President acknowledged. "Go ahead, Dr. Brandel." "Yes, ma'am. A solar storm is not known to produce E1 or E2 waves. The E3 wave will impact power grids in the manner that Secretary Jeffrey described. Presently, our ability to forecast geomagnetically induced current impacts at a local level are quite limited. However, we are working with NASA to develop tools and models that might be used for forecasting such impacts to the power grid. Naturally, if the GIC is large enough, we currently do not have the capacity to manage its effect on our power grid. The $64,000 question is, do we have any way to assess the risk that such a powerful solar flare might occur? We really have no way of knowing. Looking at history, I would say that the risk is quite small. However, it could happen tomorrow. We just can't say with any certainty. Thank you, Dr. Brandel. Does anyone have anything further to add? Tony lifted his hand off the table slightly to draw attention to himself. Yes, ma'am. I am responsible for stirring this discussion. I appreciate everyone taking the time to brief President Werner. I acknowledge that the risk of catastrophic damage to the power grid is quite small. However, as our Secretary of Homeland Security has described, the impact to our country's citizens would be devastating. I suggest that this be further studied with a view toward fully understanding its impact and beginning to take steps toward mitigating that impact. Thank you, Secretary Nestler, the President said with a smile. I'm well aware of where you stand. Anyone else? Tony felt like crawling under the table with that remark. He didn't know how to take it, but he didn't have to wait to find out. I appreciate the information that you have provided on this. I realize that this is a very complex question with few answers. I will be organizing a study to do exactly as Secretary Nestler has suggested. I pray that we never have to deal with something like this, but if we begin to improve our understanding now, we will be able to take these things into consideration as we accomplish normal upgrades to our power grid over time. I will be making an announcement in the next few weeks. Please give this team your full cooperation. Thank you all for your time. The president stood and returned to her office. Tony was ecstatic. Finally, something was about to be done.
Chapter 7. In late July, the kickoff meeting of the Electric Grid Assessment Team went well. Tony's deputy director, Marilyn McGinty, was tapped as the team lead. Her education and experience were a perfect fit, and she had a clear understanding of priorities and timelines. Tony was in his office preparing for a trip to Seattle to visit a company that was making progress with hydrogen power.
Secretary Nestler, your wife is online too?
His administrative assistant's voice chimed from the phone's intercom.
Yes, ma'am,
Tony said into his phone.
I just wanted to let you know that my trip has been canceled. The CFO lost a member of his family, so is not able to make it.
Oh, that's too bad. I know you had hopes for some real progress in that meeting. Megan Nestler was the chief technology officer of a transportation firm. She was prepared to present a plan for upgrading shipment tracking using the latest technology. The company was in Denver, but she worked primarily from her home office since their move to Virginia. She would travel to Colorado 3 or 4 times a month for important face-to-face work.
Yeah, well, I'll get it rescheduled. I'm available for dinner. Do you want to eat out?
Sure. I'm wrapping things up here and then need to head home to start packing for Seattle. I'll be home by 4.
Great.
They went to their favorite fish house for swordfish steak. Their conversation centered around Josh, who was still in Korea doing his leadership camp. They hadn't talked with him since he left, but did get emails here and there to tell them a bit about his experience.
Have you read Josh's email yet?
Megan asked. I haven't checked my personal email in a couple of days. What does he have to say?
Mostly the same. He's learning a lot. He asked several questions about the power grid. I wish you hadn't gone into such graphic detail with him that night.
I kind of regret that myself. Do you think I scared him?
What do you think? It's been over 3 months and he's asking questions about it.
I'll give him a call when I get back in town. Maybe it'll put his mind at ease if I tell him the study is finally underway. Chapter 8. The president was laughing and shaking hands with members of the Miami Heat in the East Room of the White House. It was customary for the president to invite championship sports teams to visit the White House. The lights flickered off for a few seconds and then back on again. President Werner glanced up briefly, smiled, and said,
"We've brought so much heat into the White House that the air conditioner is struggling."
The basketball players laughed politely at the president's lame joke as they stood, hands filled with plates of hors d'oeuvres and drink glasses that, in their hands, looked like they were from a child's tea set. Frank Lawton approached the president and said, "Ma'am, there's a crisis brewing in the Situation Room that requires your immediate attention." Werner looked at him and could see in his eyes that he was deadly serious. She took 2 steps, put her glass of tea on a table, and spoke in a loud voice.
"May I have your attention, please? I sincerely apologize, but something has come up that I must address right away. Congratulations again on your incredible season. I must hand off hosting duties to Mr. Dykstra. I'm so happy that you made the trip. It has been a pleasure meeting all of you."
She gave Dykstra, her Secretary of the Interior, a nod, and departed quickly with her Chief of Staff. As they walked briskly to the Situation Room, Lawton said that because of a cyber attack, the entire northeastern United States was without power. As she entered the Situation Room,
She saw her national security advisor and defense secretary talking with the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, whose face was showing on a large screen in the main conference room. She was only able to hear one side of the conversation because she hadn't yet put in her earpiece. A military aide handed her an earpiece, which she inserted into her left ear. "What have we got?" she commanded. Carl Watkins, her national security advisor, beat the others to respond. "A cyber attack has taken down the entire northeast sector of the U.S. Macy is working to determine the source. Our information tells us that China's atomic attack plan would be initiated by a cyber attack like this. Where's Tony Nestler?" "He's in Seattle. We're trying to get him linked in. His office says that he is aware of the attack and is on his way to a SCIF at the FBI field office." A SCIF, which is shorthand for a sensitive, compartmented information facility, was a room that was specifically built so that conversations within could not be heard from outside, even with the most advanced eavesdropping technology. "He should be online in about 15 minutes. "When will Cameron Macy be online?" she asked, referring to the FBI director. "Any time now." "What makes you think this is a forensic attack, Jim?" "Well, the FBI knows that it was from offshore, likely the Far East. They should know more soon," the defense secretary responded. "What states are impacted?" "We are still trying to understand that. We have confirmed that it goes from Richmond to Maine. Philadelphia is out. We think Nestler will have a handle on it when it gets on." Suddenly, the large screen in front of the president subdivided, and the faces of the FBI director and her CIA director, Lawrence Carlin, were on the monitor along with General Rodriguez. "Talk to me, Cam," she barked at her FBI director. "Our systems tell us that the hack originated from the Korean peninsula. We think that access may have gained a couple of weeks ago." "A couple of weeks ago? Why wasn't it stopped? Why don't we know who is responsible by now?" Macy's face reflected his total discomfort with the questions. "We're researching that. We get hundreds of attempted attacks on systems like this. We prioritize our research based upon the origin of the attack and other factors. It is impossible to deal with them all immediately." "So, we think this is North Korea?" "Not necessarily. It appears to have come from South Korea." At this, Carlin jumped in. "We know that China has a significant intelligence network in South Korea. It is more likely that China did this." "Well, do we have real-time information from China? Do we know their defense status?" "They are on a heightened level of alert." "What is our status, Jim?" "I have initiated the move to DEFCON 3, but if you disagree, we can take it back down." DEFCON 3 took the force's readiness up one step from normal status. Forces would be preparing for the next posture, which would be actual preparation for nuclear war. Such a change in force readiness is normally the joint decision of the President and the Secretary of Defense. "Is there a reason why you thought such a move could not wait 10 minutes for me?" "Well, no, ma'am. I felt that I knew you well enough to anticipate your thoughts on this. I apologize." Werner shot him a look that told him in no uncertain terms that he had overstepped his authority. "Continue to DEFCON 3. There is no reason to confuse the troops by apparent indecision." Tony Nestler's face popped up onto the screen. "Nestler here." "Tony, what can you tell me?" "The outage is basically from southern Virginia to Maine, as far west as the Ohio border. It has also impacted some parts of Canada where they purchase power from us. Grid management tells me that their network management system is frozen as well. They are currently unable to manage the system at all. There's no way of knowing how long this will be down. Madam President, I recommend that we at least review our nuclear response options in the event this is an attack," NSA Watkins suggested. "Okay. Give me a minute." "Madam President," interrupted Wanda Peterman, "I am being notified of violence erupting in Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York City. Trouble is brewing in D.C. as well. What kind of violence? Property damage, looting, and the like, mostly in retail areas.
Wonderful, the president muttered as she looked around the room.
Are we talking with China?
Yes. They deny that they have anything to do with this. Of course, they would never admit it.
Madam President, if I may, broke in Jeff Anderson, the Deputy Secretary of State. His boss was in South Africa and being ousted from bed. The protocol was for Anderson to step in until the secretary was available. Jeff Anderson was a longtime State Department employee who had been promoted to the number 2 spot by Secretary Rydell. There is nothing in our relationship with China that would suggest that they would take such an action at this time. They stand to lose a lot by this. Where's Rydell? South Africa, ma'am. We are working on getting him on a secure line.
Madam President, China is a crafty adversary. They will readily accept short-term pain for a long-term goal, interjected the NSA.
Carlin, she glanced toward her CIA director.
China does play a long game, but I don't think this would get them there at all. We are drawing on all our assets there to get a more definitive answer.
President Werner raised both hands to quiet the room. She looked at General Rodriguez. Go ahead with your nuclear plan review. After Kelly completed his review of possible plans, and they discussed them in detail, she was handed a card that included the launch code for the recommended plan. Her national security advisor seemed anxious to go to war. Defense and the general were standing at the ready. After pausing momentarily, she looked up. Who raised their readiness level first?
Ma'am, the SecDef said.
Who raised their readiness first? Was it China or us?
Well, I'm not sure, Lawrence Carlin stammered.
I want to know. Now.
On the screen, the CIA director was seen to turn and speak with someone in the room with him. He said in a low voice, I need the exact minute and second that China increased their readiness. Then get with the military and compare times.
Carlin turned and looked back into the camera.
It might take a few minutes to narrow that down.
I want a call set up with President Lay ASAP.
Jeff Anderson bolted from the room. Within 10 minutes, he was back asking where she would like to take the call.
The Oval Office, she answered. And I want it to be one-on-one, with normal documentation, of course.
All such calls were always monitored and transcribed. An American interpreter would also be on the call to ensure there were no misunderstandings. Anderson responded, The Oval Office in 15 minutes, ma'am. The CIA director suddenly turned away from the camera. When he turned back, he said, Ma'am, it appears that China heightened their status after we did. Werner glared at the senior officials throughout the Situation Room as she removed her earpiece. She set it on the table in front of her and threw the nuclear codes across the table as she stood.
Wanda, keep me abreast on the violence in the streets. Jim, Tony, update me on the power situation as soon as you have more information.
The president stormed out of the room. Chapter 9. Following President Werner's call with President Lay, she called the defense secretary and briefed him. They immediately returned to DEFCON 2, the military normal readiness level. 20 minutes later, she received a call from Cameron Macy. We have more on the origin of the hack.
Good.
It originated from Camp Eagle, our army base in Korea.
It's someone from our military ranks?
It appears so. It was not done from a government computer. We're looking at people on the base that have personal computers.
I hate that, but if we do find the person, maybe they will help restore the power.
You never know. There is one more thing you should know.
Yes?
Tony Nestler's son, Joshua, is at a summer ROTC assignment there, and is among those who have such a personal PC on base.
Tony's son?
We don't know that it's him, but I just wanted you to be aware. Do you want me to keep Tony in the loop until we know for sure?
No. How long will this take?
Well, it'll take a day or so to check them all out. We don't have any staff there. We're having to rely on the military to help. I don't want to sideline Tony for that long amid the current situation. Can you check his son's PC first? We should be able to do that. Okay. Do it and let me know. The president put down the phone. Lawton was there.
I've canceled the rest of your afternoon appointments. I've got Gina coming in to discuss how we should handle this with the press.
President Werner stared at him, as if trying to process what he had just said. She gave him a thumbs up to show her approval. Gina Kavanaugh was the White House press secretary and had been in the Situation Room for most of the drama. She probably already had a few possible communication strategies outlined, with her recommended one fleshed out.
Progress being made? He asked.
Yes, is all she said.
Wanda Peterman is here to speak with you.
Good. Peterman walked in with a serious look on her face. We have a death in Philadelphia. A store owner tried to defend his property and was beaten to death as a result. So far, there has been no report of gun violence, but Nightfall will be there in a couple of hours. That's when we will really see where this goes. How are the mayors and the police handling this? Like always, some well and others not so much. Is there anything you need from me on this? A calming voice to the American people when you are able to provide one. You'll have it. Thank you. Chapter 10. Tony Nestler's mind was whirring with questions, ideas, and other jumbled thoughts. He felt inhibited by the fact that he was thousands of miles away from his office and only had a phone. He was given an available office at the FBI building to work from. After the president stormed out of the Situation Room, he left the skiff and started making phone calls. There was little anyone could tell him as to what was wrong. The specialists were busy preparing to take down the management system and bring up the backup system. This would likely not resolve all of the problems, but would provide them with more information and some element of control. He tried to call the president several times to update her on what they knew. She was not taking his call. That wasn't surprising, as he knew how busy she would be handling the crisis. The people from his department that were traveling with him were also running down information and doing a good job of updating him. They reached out to some big energy suppliers in the industry to learn what they were dealing with. He wanted to be on the phone continuously monitoring what was going on, but he had to give people time to do their work. He stared out the window of the sixth-floor office he was in. The Seattle Space Needle was in view, and it was a gloomy day with drizzle blowing against the window, normal for Seattle. His office advised that the media was clamoring for an interview. He also wanted to speak to the president about this. He could give a statement, but didn't want to do so until he could make sure that he understood the strategic communication plan. He tried to call the White House Communications Office and the press secretary's office, but was not able to reach them either. After an hour, he began to wonder if he should just get on the plane and head home. He had flown out on a private aircraft provided by the company he went to visit, so he could leave whenever he wanted to. His personal cell phone rang. He looked to see it was Megan. He imagined that she was impacted by the power outage, like everyone else. "Hey, Megan. I don't have much time. What do you need?" "The FBI are in our house. They have a search warrant. They want to take my work computer," she shouted, half in fear and half in anger. "Wait a minute. What are you talking about?" "They're in Josh's room going through everything. Could he be in some sort of trouble?" "Let me talk to the lead agent." There was silence on the line. He waited for almost 2 minutes, and she finally returned to the phone. "He said you should call the FBI director. He handed me a piece of paper with Cameron Murray's phone number on it." "Give me the number," Tony demanded. She read him the phone number. "I'll call you back," he said, ending the call. Tony called the number he had been given. "Murray. Director Murray, this is Tony Nestler. Why are your people in my home?" he said forcefully. "Hey, Tony. Your son Joshua
has been implicated in the Northeast blackout. I tried to call you, but was unsuccessful in getting through." This angered him. "I have been answering my phone all afternoon. I have been in touch with my office regularly, and I'm in your FBI building in Seattle. You must not have tried very hard. If you had gotten through, I could have saved you a lot of time. This is ridiculous. My son has nothing to do with this." "Well, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, Tony. It was Joshua's laptop that hacked the power system." "Well, if that's the case, someone else must have used it. My son wouldn't do something like this." "I understand where you're coming from. We'll investigate fully. Where's Josh?" "He's being confined at Fort Eagle in Korea." "I want to talk with him." "We're still interviewing him." "You're interviewing him without a lawyer present?" "A judge advocate general from the base is with him." "He is not in the military. That does not cut it. Stop the interviews until he has an attorney. I'm serious about this." "Well, let me talk with the Attorney General, and I'll get back to you." "What are you looking for in my home?" "We need to determine if he has utilized any other equipment in planning or perpetrating criminal activity, this or any other. We want to see if there is anything in the home that will lead us to a motive." "Why wasn't I contacted?" "Look, Tony, you know I can't notify a suspect's family in advance of such a search. I'm sure you aren't involved, but since we are looking for forensics, we have to make sure everything is kept undisturbed." "I want to talk with my son. Let me see what I can do. I'll call you back." Chapter 11. Tony immediately called Megan to update her. It was an impossible conversation to have on the phone, but there was no other way. He heard 4 rings in his ear. Just as he thought it would go to voicemail, she picked up. "Tony, please tell me what's going on," she said with anger in her voice. "Megan, why don't you go onto the back patio or someplace out of earshot of the FBI agents?" Tony suggested. "Find someplace quiet." "Okay. Did you talk to Murray?" "I did. He says Josh is involved in the hack that has blacked out the Northeast." "Well, that's ridiculous," she said with disgust in her voice. "That's what I told him. He says Josh's laptop was the one that hacked the system." "Well, I can't believe that. Why would he do something like that? And from South Korea, no less." "I have no idea. Here is my concern. By my understanding, he is technically a civilian being held in a military brig, and a military attorney has been assigned to his case. I've asked that he not be spoken to until he has an attorney selected by us with him." "Isn't his ROTC assignment considered military?" "I wouldn't think so, but I need to speak with someone who knows the ins and outs of this stuff." "Where are we going to find a lawyer in South Korea?" "No, it needs to be an American attorney." Suddenly Tony's phone rang. Looking at the display, it said, U.S. Government, Secure. "Hey, I've got a call coming through from a government phone. I'll call you back." Tony pressed the screen to end the call and answered the next. "Tony Nestler," he said into the phone. A woman's voice said, "Secretary Nestler, please hold for President Werner." "Okay." A few seconds later, he heard, "Tony." "Yes, ma'am?" "Cam Murray tells me he has updated you on the situation." "Yes, ma'am, he has. We are totally bewildered by this charge." "I can only imagine what a shock it is to you," the president said in a manner that was more curt than empathetic. "I hope you understand that, under the circumstances, I must place you on paid leave until this all gets sorted out." I didn't anticipate that, but it is your decision to make," he said slowly. At this, his mind was spinning. He couldn't believe what was happening. First Josh, and now this. He knew that this was a formality. He would likely be fired before the week was out. "Tony, please return as soon as possible. We will be in touch with your office to get updates on the blackout mess. I'm sure you want to get home to deal with the personal issues at hand." "Yes, ma'am. I suggest you place Mick Hansen into an acting role. He is up to speed on everything I have been involved in." "Thanks, Tony. We will take it from here." The phone went dead. She showed no interest in Tony's recommendation. She asked no questions about the blackout. Suddenly, he was persona non grata in the Werner Administration. He and his small team were at the airport within an hour, and the aircraft was landing gear up, headed for Virginia 15 minutes after that. Phone calls from his staff ceased. He advised the 3 individuals that were with him of his status. He didn't get into his personal issues with them, only said that he had been placed on administrative leave for a time. His staff was furious at this. All he could do was to tell them that there was a valid reason for it and encourage them to focus on the issue with the grid. When they were over Nebraska, Tony got a call from Tom Wilkins, the Attorney General. He was thankful that his position, or former position, was affording him access that very few people might have. "Tony, this is Tom Wilkins," he began. "Tom, thank you so much for calling. I simply can't believe what is happening. It is hard for me to believe that Josh is involved in this. I want to talk to him as soon as I can. If I can go to Korea, could I meet with him?" "Josh is in a lot of trouble. His laptop is tied directly to the hack. He has been placed into pretrial confinement on the base there. He's not military. He's an ROTC student. How can they detain him?" "Well, first of all, an ROTC student on summer assignment on a military base is subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, in the same way someone on reserve duty would be. His commanding officer has 48 to 72 hours to bring written justification for his confinement. We are working with her to document what we have. There will be no problem with documentation. He won't be released from confinement." "He's going to be kept there and tried in Korea? This isn't a military matter." "No, Josh's actions fall under domestic terrorism. It is a matter—" "Domestic terrorism?" Tony interrupted. "My son is not a terrorist. This is absurd." "Tony, I'm trying to explain things to you. Are you going to listen?" Tony paused, still in disbelief. "Yes, go ahead," he said resignedly. Domestic terrorism is handled by the Department of Justice. In situations like this, the UCMJ assimilates our federal code in charging a service member. We will be returning him to the states and will handle this matter within our federal court system. What happens in the meantime? What about his rights? Josh has been assigned a defense attorney from the Judge Advocate General's office there. When he was taken into custody, he was given his rights under UCMJ, Article 31B, which are like his Miranda rights, including his right to remain silent. When taken into custody by our people, he will be given his Miranda rights. I need to get to my son. I'm an attorney. I want to make sure he is protected. I'll arrange for you to talk with him by phone. Will it be a private conversation? Yes. I want to go to Korea. Realistically, Tony, he will be back in the States in a few days. He'd be traveling all over the world for little purpose. Tell me when I can talk to my son. I want to talk with him right away. Let's see. It's about 7 a.m. in Korea. When will you be home? Tony looked at his watch, though it did him no good. Just a minute, he said. He signaled the steward and asked what time they would land. He was advised that they expected to be parked by 8:30 p.m. He thought for a moment and then returned to the phone. I'll be home by 9:30. Okay, I'll arrange for you to talk with him by 10:30 p.m. That will be 11:30 a.m. where he is. Who should I call? They'll call you. Just give me the number you want them to call. Tony gave him the number. Okay, Tony. I'm sorry to see you in this situation. I will assign someone to keep you in the loop as things progress. I hope you understand that we can't handle this any differently than we would for anyone else. Tony couldn't help but think about all the accusations that the DOJ had charged cases differently for political reasons. He wasn't going to go there. Besides, he knew that the national attention this was getting would require someone to be charged. He still hoped it would not be Josh. Thanks. I appreciate your call. We'll be ready by 10:30. Tony called Megan back and updated her. She said the FBI had finished, taking her work laptop with them. She seemed somewhat relieved to learn that they could talk to Josh tonight. Tony told her he would be home by 9:30. Chapter 12. They arrived at Dulles International Airport and parked at the private aircraft fixed-base operations at 8:22 p.m. There were no lights on except for the runway and taxiway lights. Those, along with flight navigation systems, were on backup generators. It was now past dusk, so darkness was complete. 2 workers met the plane with electric cars and drove the passengers and what little luggage they had to their cars. The sky was overcast, concealing the moon and stars. Tony had an eerie, foreboding feeling. This is what life would be like were the electric grid to be taken out by an EMP. The exception, of course, was that there would be no runway lights as the generators would have been fried. He also would not be able to drive home because all his car's electric components would have been taken out as well. Driving home in total darkness was more challenging than he had thought it would be. There were no streetlights. During short stretches, where no cars were in front of him, it was challenging to see where the road was going in front of him. His headlights on the reflective roadway paint showed him the road, but he was surprised at how little distance in front of the car was lighted. He didn't feel comfortable driving more than 45 miles an hour. Usually, however, there were vehicles in front of him, and he could see the string of red lights along the road in front of him, and the white headlights that were coming the other way. Even that was different. Strings of lights in a sea of darkness. He got home at 9:40. There were no stoplights in town. His neighborhood was totally dark. There was a glow in some windows that indicated people either had a backup generator or some powerful backup lighting. He automatically pressed the button for the garage door opener, but the door didn't rise. He parked in the driveway and went in the front door. In the house, Megan had found 2 pop-up LED lanterns that they had bought for just such an occasion. They gave off enough light so that they could maneuver around without tripping over furniture. Megan was sitting in the living room and didn't get up when he opened the door. "Do you have any more information?" she asked. "Nothing at all. How are you getting along?" I'm afraid for Josh." "Yeah, me too. He'll call soon. Hopefully we can find out that this is all just a big mistake." "Have you eaten?" she asked. "They fed us on the plane. How about you?" Tony asked as he sat down on the couch adjacent to his wife. "I ate some leftovers from the fridge before they spoiled. Do we know anything about the power outage?" "No. I guess there is some other news I haven't shared with you. I got a call from the president this afternoon, and I've been placed on administrative leave, which means I'm out." "Oh, great," she said, without expression. "That's the least of my worries. We need to take care of Josh." Tony opened the briefcase that he had carried into the house and pulled out a legal pad to take notes. When the call came through, he put his phone on speaker mode so both could hear. "Hello?" "Hello, is this Mr. Nestler?" said a voice that was unfamiliar. "Yes, and my wife Megan is here as well. I'm going to put you on hold for just a minute," the voice said, and the line went silent. "Mom? Dad? Josh?" they said simultaneously with raised voices. "I'm sorry, so sorry," Josh whined, ending in a squeak as he broke into tears. "We're here for you. We're going to work this out with you. You need to tell us what's going on," Tony said softly. "We love you, Josh." is all his mom could muster at the time. "Josh, is anyone there with you? Or are they listening to our conversation?"
"No one is here. They said we would have privacy."
"Okay. Tell us what this is all about."
"I did it, Dad. I took down the electricity there,"
he said, his voice shaking. Tony and Megan stared at each other in disbelief. "Why did you do that, son?" his dad asked. "How did you do that?"
"Over the last 3 months, I worked at getting into their system. It really wasn't that hard."
"But why?"
"I was trying to help, Dad. I thought if the president saw what that kind of power outage was like, she would listen to you and help protect the electric grid."
Tony exploded. "Help? Do you know that this power outage almost caused a nuclear war this afternoon?" Megan gasped, covering her mouth with her hand.
"I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't know,"
he said, clearly in tears. Tony sat motionless for a few seconds. "I'm sorry I got angry, Josh. This was wrong. It was not helpful. People might have been hurt."
"I guess I didn't think it all the way through."
Josh took 2 long sniffs.
"I never thought it would come to this, Mom. Mom, I'm scared."
Tears streamed down Megan's face, her hands still covering her mouth. Finally, she said,
"I'm sorry too, honey. We'll get through this together."
Over the phone, they heard him crying loudly.
"I'm sorry. I'm so sorry."
Tony looked at the phone on the table. The red battery light was flashing. "Crap," he said. "My phone is about dead. We're going to get cut off."
"Can't you plug it in?"
"There's no power here, son," Tony said, somewhat impatiently. "Josh, can you fix the power grid?"
"It will restart itself at 11 p.m. I didn't do any permanent damage to it."
Tony pressed the button on his Fitbit watch. The time was 10:54. "That's good, Joshua. Thank you for that."
"Joshua, we love you and will be with you throughout all of this,"
Megan assured with a weak voice. Tony interrupted. "Josh, you are going to be brought back to the United States very quickly. I will get you a lawyer. I want you to understand something. If anyone at all asks to talk with you about what has happened, politely tell them that you have nothing to say until you get your own attorney. Do you understand? We will get you an attorney here as soon as you are home. Tell me you understand."
"Yes,
The phone went dead. They sat speechless for what seemed like forever.
"My actions led him to do this,"
Tony squeaked through his tears.
"It's as much my fault as it is his."
Megan stood and moved to the couch and sat next to her husband. No words were spoken. They just sat there and cried together. Chapter 13. At 11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, the power system was restored. Tony had not called anyone to let them know it would happen that way. When the call ended, it was 2 minutes till 11, and it would have taken longer than that to find the number to call, with his phone out of service. As feared, after nightfall, looting and violence continued. A store owner was shot and killed in Baltimore when he tried to defend his property. 4 men broke the front window of his jewelry store and found him inside with a shotgun in his lap. He told them to leave. One of the men pulled a handgun from his belt and shot the proprietor 3 times in the chest. He was declared dead on arrival at the hospital. In some locations, the National Guard was deployed, but the power came back just about the time they arrived on scene. When streetlights and store lights were restored, the crowds dispersed. Police and guard presence in the cities experiencing violence became fully visible, and looters no longer were hidden by the cloak of darkness. The President was briefed by her Director of Homeland Security and Attorney General. She spoke to the nation from the Oval Office at 11 the next morning, allaying fears of terrorism. She simply announced that a person of interest had been detained and an investigation was being conducted. Law enforcement and military leaders did not identify their suspect. However, word traveled fast within a Korean military base, as it does elsewhere. By noon that day, Josh Nestler's high school senior picture was being shown as a person of interest on every news outlet. President Werner told Lawton to begin a search for a new energy secretary. She also asked that a quiet search be started for a new national security advisor and defense secretary. She would make those changes over several months to maintain a strong defense posture during the transition. Attorney General Wilkins briefed the President that federal charges would include computer intrusion, which violates the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, as well as domestic terrorism. The penalties could reach 35 years imprisonment plus possible fines. The state of Pennsylvania and Maryland both intended to charge Joshua Nestler with second-degree murder for the deaths that occurred while he was perpetrating a felony. The military statute called for a penalty of up to 30 years in prison if convicted. Pennsylvania law called for up to 10 years in prison and a $25,000 fine. Various counties in the affected state were also anxious to make charges of criminal mischief in order to recover property damage done by violence during the outage. Joshua Nestler was returned to the United States with an FBI escort and was turned over to the U.S. Marshal Service to be held without bond. Chapter 14. When Josh learned that his actions had also cost his father his job, he was devastated. His removal from the ROTC program further stripped away his feeling of self-worth. After the U.S. Attorney's Office learned the motives behind his actions, they were conflicted. They acknowledged that this was the ill-considered act of a 20-year-old kid who thought he was helping his father and even his country. He was also guilty of an act that had wreaked havoc for a large portion of the population, which even led to the deaths of 2 people. Tony spent the next 8 months supporting his son through the nightmare that he had created for himself. Megan's job provided ample resources for them to live on, but all of their savings were used up paying legal bills, and they had to take on considerable debt as well. Josh's attorney had no problem securing his release, pending trial. He also led Josh and his dad through the maze of making this a high-profile case. They laid everything on the table to the public through media appearances and other interviews. President Werner's image was slightly tarnished as the backroom efforts of Tony were spelled out to help the public understand Josh's motive. Tony's own reputation was hurt as he publicly admitted that he had shared his national security concerns with his young son. Some positive things came from the public discussion, however. The general public became more aware of the risk posed by certain solar flares and by a potential EMP blast, and was happy that the Werner administration was taking the issue more seriously and had initiated the study. There were different opinions as to how this legal strategy had worked. The public empathized with his situation and weren't anxious to see him punished too harshly. In order to avoid a trial, a deal was struck. Josh pled guilty to a felony computer intrusion charge and was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security federal prison in Morgantown, West Virginia. Once released, he would be on probation and required to spend 5 years assisting the federal government with cybersecurity analysis. State and local governments had not brought charges against him, but they reserved the right to do so. Those responsible for the murder of the 2 store owners were located and charged. Tony's time spent with his son during the legal wrangling and public relations effort was key in pulling Josh out of the depression he had experienced. Tony accepted responsibility for setting the foundation for Josh's crime, and Josh accepted responsibility for his actions. He didn't know if he had been dealt with fairly, but accepted his punishment, assuming he deserved it. He actually looked forward to helping in the cybersecurity program. It was a way that he could serve the country since his military option had been eliminated. He was allowed to finish his college degree online while serving his sentence. Tony and Megan did not believe that Josh had been treated fairly, but recognized that it could have been so much worse. They remained in Virginia in order to visit Josh regularly. Tony went to work with an energy research group. Comments from the author. People who see my book titles might wonder, what is a wayward patriot? A wayward patriot is someone who loves their country and wants what is best for her. It is a well-intended person who steps over the line or perhaps takes matters into their own hands for what they might believe to be the greater good. Sometimes, as in the case in this story, the consequences can be catastrophic. My Wayward Patriot series does not always follow one individual, but each book introduces a new patriot. The reason for this is that my lead characters are common people, not unlike the reader themselves, who find themselves in situations they could never have imagined. This typically doesn't happen more than once during a person's lifetime. Typically, the backdrop of my stories has some political element to it. However, they are not political in nature. Neither the political right nor left are assumed to be bad or wrong in my books. They are who they are. My books are not so much about politics, but rather about the human condition. Sometimes we make mistakes or go too far in seeking good. I hope you enjoyed this In Defense of the Grid novella. If you would like to read more, check out my first full-length book, Wayward Patriot, Preserving the Vote, or my second novel, A Higher Betrayal. Both are available as ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks, with narration by Daniel Daly, who narrated this novella. As of this writing, I am working on my third full-length book, with a working title of Meltdown. I hope to release it in the spring of 2026. You can buy my books online wherever books are sold. Also, ask your local library to make them available there as well. You can learn more about me and my books at my website, jackmeyerauthor.com. Sign up for my monthly newsletter there as well. It usually comes free with books for you to download. The End. I hope you've enjoyed this In Defense of the Grid novella. If you would like to read more, check out my first full-length book, Wayward Patriot, Preserving the Vote, or my second novel, A Higher Betrayal. Both are available as ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks, narrated by a real live human being. As of this writing, I am working on my third full-length book, with a working title of Meltdown. I hope to release it in the spring of 2026. And please leave a review at the website you purchased this audiobook. Thank you.